The wine glass tilted. Time slowed. Red liquid arced through the air, splashing across $15,000 of white silk like a crimson accusation. Carter's breath caught, not because of the ruined vest, but because his sleeve had slipped. There it was. The tattoo. Golden compass etched into his skin, glinting under the chandelier's glow like a forbidden secret suddenly exposed. Adelaide Hart's fork clattered against fine china. Her eyes, sharp, calculating, always in control, went wide with recognition. She stared at his wrist as if she'd just discovered buried treasure in the last place she'd expected. The entire dining room blurred into static. Her lips parted. She whispered 2 words, barely audible over the ambient jazz, but Carter heard them, crystal clear, and they hit him like a freight train, because those 2 words were a name he'd spent 3 years running from, a ghost he thought he'd buried deep enough that no one would ever dig up. But here she was, this stranger in expensive silk, holding his past in her gaze like a loaded gun. Carter grabbed a napkin with shaking hands, trying to cover the spill, trying to pull his sleeve down, trying to do anything but meet her eyes. But it was too late. Adelaide's stare pinned him in place like a butterfly under glass. The compass tattoo, that intricate golden design wrapped around the mathematical formula phi equals 1.618, gleamed accusingly in the low light. His signature, his mark. The thing that had once defined Carter West, the architect who'd designed buildings in 10 countries before he turned 30. The man who'd vanished without a trace 3 years ago. "I'm so sorry, Mom," Carter managed, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'll cover the cleaning costs, But Adelaide wasn't listening. She reached across the table, her manicured fingers stopping just short of his wrist. Not touching, just hovering there. Her hand trembled slightly, and Carter noticed something he hadn't before. This woman, this billionaire CEO in her tailored perfection, looked exhausted. Dark circles beneath expertly applied concealer. A tightness around her mouth that spoke of sleepless nights. "Carter West," she said it again, louder this time. Not a question, a statement, an accusation, a plea, all wrapped into 2 words that shouldn't exist anymore. Carter took a step back, bumping into another table. A couple looked up, annoyed, but he barely noticed. His mind raced. How did she know? He'd changed everything. New name, new city, new life. He'd become Carter Flynn, single father and waiter at the Azure Room, and he'd been invisible for 3 years. Safe, hidden. Until tonight. Adelaide stood slowly, her movements deliberate, despite the wine staining her vest. She was taller than he'd realized. 5'10", maybe more in those heels. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe bun that matched the sharp angles of her face. But her eyes, grey, intense, burning with something Carter couldn't quite name, those eyes saw through every wall he'd built. "I need to speak with you," she said quietly. "Privately, please." The please sounded foreign in her mouth, as if she didn't use the word often. Carter glanced around the dining room. His manager was watching from across the room, concern creasing his forehead. Other waiters had paused mid-service, sensing drama. Customers pretended not to stare, while absolutely staring. Carter's shift didn't end for another 3 hours. He had bills to pay. Ruby's school tuition was due next week. He couldn't afford to lose this job over some billionaire's curiosity about a tattoo. But something in Adelaide's expression stopped him from walking away. Desperation. Raw and unfiltered. He recognized it because he'd worn the same look for months after Sarah died. "My break is in 20 minutes. Carter heard himself say. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks north." Adelaide nodded once, sharp and businesslike, then reached into her purse and pulled out 5 crisp $100 bills. She placed them on the wine-soaked table, without counting. "For your trouble," she said. Then she turned and walked toward the exit, her heels clicking against the marble floor like a countdown timer. Carter watched her go, his heart hammering against his ribs. He looked down at his wrist, at the tattoo that had betrayed him. The golden compass seemed to mock him. All those years of hiding, undone by a slipped sleeve and spilled wine. 23 minutes later, Carter pushed open the door of Greystone Coffee, still wearing his waiter's uniform. Adelaide sat in the far corner, an untouched espresso in front of her. She'd changed somehow. The CEO armor had cracked. She looked smaller, more human, more real. When she saw him, she gestured to the empty chair across from her. Carter sat, keeping his distance, keeping his guard up. They studied each other in silence. The coffee shop hummed with late-night energy. Students typing on laptops, a couple sharing a dessert. Normal people living normal lives. Unlike them. "I'm not who you think I am," Carter started, but Adelaide cut him off with a sharp laugh. It sounded brittle, like glass about to shatter. "Don't." Her voice was firm. "I've spent the last week reading everything I could find about Carter West. I have a copy of Architecture Digest from June 2019 in my office. There's a photo of you on page 47. Same tattoo, same position, same intricate design. You're him." She paused, her grey eyes boring into his. "The question isn't who you are. The question is why you're serving wine instead of designing buildings." Carter felt his jaw tighten. This woman had no right to his story. No right to dig up bones he'd buried. But something in her expression, that raw desperation he'd glimpsed earlier, made him hesitate. She wasn't here for gossip or blackmail. She was here for something else. Something that mattered enough to chase down a waiter after he'd ruined her $15,000 vest. "That life ended 3 years ago," Carter said quietly. "Carter West is dead. I'm just Carter Flynn now. I have a daughter to raise. That's all that matters." Adelaide leaned forward, her hands wrapped around the espresso cup like she needed its warmth. "I need you," she said bluntly. "Hart Industries is competing for the Emerald Gateway project. $2 billion. A cultural complex that will define Portland for the next 50 years. I've hired 3 architects. All famous, all talented, all failed. The design review board rejected every proposal. Said they lack soul, lack vision, lack the thing that makes architecture art instead of just construction." Her voice dropped. "I have 2 weeks left. If I don't submit something revolutionary, my company collapses. 500 people lose their jobs. Everything I've built for 12 years disappears." Carter shook his head before she finished. "I don't do that anymore. I can't. My hands." He held them up, and even in the coffee shop's dim light, the tremor was visible. "Car accident 3 years ago. Same one that killed my wife. I can't draw straight lines anymore. Can't control the fine motor skills needed for detailed work. That's why Carter West died. Because the man who could create those buildings doesn't exist anymore." The words tasted bitter. He'd said them before, to himself, in mirrors at 3 in the morning when Ruby was asleep and the ghosts came calling. But Adelaide didn't flinch, didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She just pulled out her phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was an architectural rendering. Beautiful, technically perfect, soulless. "This is what my 3rd architect submitted. It's competent. It meets every requirement. And it's completely forgettable." She swiped to another image. "This is what Portland deserves. What I know you could create. Not with your hands. With your mind, with your vision. I don't need you to draw. I need you to see. To dream. To tell me what should exist. I'll handle the rest." Carter stared at the phone, at the sterile building design that looked like every other modern complex. Then he looked at Adelaide. Really looked. Saw the shadows under her eyes. The coffee she hadn't touched because she'd probably had too much already. The way her expensive clothes hung slightly loose, as if she'd lost weight from stress. This woman was drowning, and for some reason she'd decided he was the life raft. "Why me?" he asked. "There are other architects, younger, with steady hands and current portfolios. Why track down a ghost?" Adelaide's smile was sad. "Because I've followed your work since 2015. I was nobody then. Just starting Hart Industries in a rented office with 3 employees and a dream. I saw your Harmony Tower in Seattle, the way you used light, the way every angle served a purpose beyond function. It taught me that business could be art, that creating something could mean more than profit margins." She paused, her voice softening. "When you vanished, I mourned. The world lost something irreplaceable. But now I know you're not dead. You're just hiding. And I'm asking, begging for you to stop. Just for 2 weeks. Help me create something beautiful. Then you can go back to being invisible if that's what you want." The words hung in the air between them. Carter's first instinct was still refusal. He'd built his new life carefully. Ruby came first. Always. Being a waiter meant he could pick her up from school, help with homework, tuck her in every night. Architecture had consumed him before, eaten every hour, every thought, every piece of his soul. He couldn't go back to that obsession. Wouldn't risk losing Ruby the way he'd lost Sarah. Not to death, but to neglect. But Adelaide's eyes held something that gave him pause. Not manipulation, not desperation anymore. Just honest need. The kind that recognized his boundaries and asked anyway. "I have a daughter," Carter said finally. "Ruby. She's 7. She doesn't know about Carter West. As far as she's concerned, her dad is just a waiter who makes enough to keep her in art supplies and soccer cleats. I won't let her find out about my past. Not yet. She's too young. And if I help you, there are conditions. My name stays Carter Flynn. No publicity, no press releases, no architectural magazines writing comeback stories. The design goes under Hart Industries. I'm a consultant at most, anonymous, invisible, the way I need to be." Adelaide nodded immediately, relief flooding her features. "Done. Anything you want. I'll sign whatever contract you need. Just please." She reached across the table, stopping just before touching his hand. "Please help me save this. I'm out of options, out of time. You're the only person who can do this." Carter looked at her outstretched hand, looked at the tattoo on his own wrist. The golden compass that had once pointed toward a brilliant future and now pointed toward, what? Safety? Obscurity? Or maybe, just maybe, a chance to prove that Carter West hadn't completely died in that accident 3 years ago. 2 weeks, Carter said. "I'll look at your project, give you ideas, guide your design team. But I work from home, after Ruby's asleep. And if at any point this interferes with my daughter, I walk away. No explanations, no guilt. Those are my terms." Adelaide's smile transformed her face. Suddenly she looked younger, less like a corporate titan and more like a woman who'd just been granted a stay of execution. "Deal," she said, extending her hand properly this time. Carter shook it. Her grip was firm, professional, but her hand was cold. They exchanged numbers, made plans to meet at her office tomorrow night at 9. Then Adelaide stood, leaving cash for both their coffees even though she hadn't touched hers. "Thank you," she said simply. "You have no idea what this means." Then she was gone, leaving Carter alone with his thoughts and the weight of a decision he already half regretted. He looked at his phone. 11:47. Ruby would be asleep by now, her babysitter probably dozing on their couch. He should go home. Should crawl into bed and forget this entire night happened. But instead, he found himself opening his phone's Notes app. His fingers moved across the screen, shaky but functional. Words appeared. Ideas. Concepts. The beginning of something he'd sworn he'd never do again. By the time Carter stood to leave, he had 3 pages of notes about the Emerald Gateway project, and for the first time in 3 years, his hands weren't shaking. The next evening, Carter stood outside Hart Industries headquarters, Ruby's hand tucked safely in his. He'd had to bring her. The babysitter cancelled last minute, and there was no one else. Ruby looked up at the gleaming glass tower with wide eyes. "Daddy, why are we at the fancy building?" she asked, her 7-year-old curiosity on full display. Carter squeezed her hand gently. "Daddy has to help someone with a work project. Just for a little while. You can draw in the office, okay?" Ruby nodded, satisfied with this explanation, and they walked through the revolving doors into a lobby that screamed money and power. Adelaide met them on the 20th floor, her expression shifting from professional to surprised when she saw Ruby. But she recovered quickly, crouching down to Ruby's eye level with a genuine smile that transformed her severe features. "You must be Ruby," Adelaide said warmly. "Your dad told me you like to draw. I have markers and paper in my office. The good kind. Would you like some?" Ruby's eyes lit up. "The good kind? Like the ones with 100 colors?" Adelaide laughed. "Better. The professional kind that architects use." She glanced up at Carter. "I hope it's okay that she's here." "I should have asked." Carter felt something unknot in his chest. Adelaide hadn't made him feel guilty about bringing Ruby, hadn't acted inconvenienced or annoyed. Instead, she'd immediately made his daughter feel welcome. "Thank you," he said quietly. Adelaide just nodded and led them to a conference room that looked like something from a design magazine. One wall was entirely glass, offering a stunning view of Portland's lights. The opposite wall held a massive digital screen, currently displaying the bland architectural rendering Adelaide had shown him yesterday. Ruby immediately claimed a corner with her new markers and paper, happily lost in her own world. Adelaide pulled up a chair next to Carter, her tablet loaded with project specifications. "Emerald Gateway," she began, all business now. 5 buildings, cultural center, performing arts theater, public library, art museum, and a community space. They want it to represent Portland's commitment to sustainability and art. To be a landmark that defines the city for generations. She swiped through images of the proposed site, a 12-acre lot near the Willamette River. The design board wants something that incorporates natural elements, maximizes green space, uses renewable energy, and somehow captures the spirit of the Pacific Northwest. Oh, and it has to work within a budget and timeline that's borderline impossible. Carter studied the site photos, his mind already racing. He could see it. Not clearly yet, but the ghost of an idea forming. "The golden ratio," he murmured, almost to himself. Phi, 1.618. It's everywhere in nature. Shells, flowers, human bodies. The most pleasing proportions to the human eye because they're literally natural. He looked up at Adelaide. "Your previous architects focused on innovation, technology, statement pieces. But Portland doesn't want to be impressed. It wants to come home. What if we design something that feels like it grew there? Like the buildings are part of the landscape, not imposed on it?" Adelaide leaned closer, her grey eyes intense. "Keep going." Carter stood, moving to the digital screen. His hands still trembled, but his voice was steady. "Imagine 5 buildings that from above form the shape of an emerald. Not obvious, subtle, but when you look at aerial photos, there it is. Each building uses the golden ratio in its proportions. Each one flows into the next like water, like trees, like the natural formations along the river. Maximum natural light through strategic glass placement. Green roofs that aren't just functional but beautiful. spaces that invite instead of intimidate. He was talking faster now, the ideas pouring out like they hadn't in years. The cultural center as the heart, the theater as wings, the library as roots, the museum as elevation, the community space as open hands. Connected by gardens that use native plants, walking paths that follow the natural curves of the land. No straight lines where they're not needed, no angles just for show. Every design choice serves the purpose of making people feel at home, feel connected, feel like this place was always meant to be here. Carter turned back to Adelaide and found her staring at him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Her eyes were shining. Was she crying? "That's it," Adelaide whispered. "That's exactly it." She stood quickly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand in a gesture that seemed uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Sorry, I'm not usually—" She trailed off, composing herself. "I've been searching for this vision for months. Spent hundreds of thousands on architects who gave me technically perfect buildings with zero soul, and you just described it in 3 minutes. This is why I needed you." She pulled out her tablet, fingers flying across the screen. "I'll have my design team here tomorrow. Can you walk them through this? Give them enough to start rendering?" Carter hesitated. Tomorrow meant another night away from his normal routine, another step deeper into the world he'd left behind. But Ruby was in the corner, drawing what looked like a building made of rainbows, completely content. And Adelaide was looking at him with such hope that he couldn't quite bring himself to refuse. "Tomorrow," he agreed. "But same conditions, 9 p.m. after Ruby's in bed." "And Adelaide?" She looked up. "This is just consultation. I'm not coming back full-time. I can't be that person anymore." Adelaide nodded solemnly. "I understand. 2 weeks. That's all I'm asking." But 2 weeks turned into something neither of them expected. Carter found himself at Hart Industries every night, working with Adelaide's design team, refining the Emerald Gateway concept. His trembling hands couldn't draw, but his mind could see every detail. He'd describe what he envisioned, and the team would render it. They'd project it on the big screen, and Carter would pace in front of it, suggesting adjustments. "Move this angle 5 degrees. Increase the glass here. The roofline should curve like a river bend, not cut like a knife." The team hung on his every word. They'd been directionless for months, and suddenly they had vision, purpose, guidance from someone who understood architecture as art, not just construction. Adelaide was there every night, too, watching, learning, occasionally offering business perspective that grounded Carter's more ambitious ideas. They developed a rhythm. Carter would describe his vision. The team would render. Adelaide would calculate costs and feasibility. They'd compromise, adjust, improve. The Emerald Gateway design evolved from concept to something remarkable. Something that made people stop and stare at the renderings with wonder instead of polite appreciation. But more than the project, something else was developing between Carter and Adelaide. Late-night conversations that strayed from architecture to life. Adelaide told him about building her company from nothing, about the loneliness at the top, about the constant pressure to be perfect. Carter found himself sharing things he hadn't told anyone. How Ruby had saved him after Sarah died. How being a waiter had taught him to see people again. How he'd been so consumed by designing buildings that he'd forgotten to build a life. One night, around 2 a.m., they were alone in the conference room. The design team had left hours ago. The Emerald Gateway renderings glowed on the screen, 5 buildings that looked like they'd been grown instead of built, arranged in a subtle emerald shape that took your breath away. Adelaide sat next to Carter, both of them exhausted but unable to look away from what they'd created. "My father was a construction worker," Adelaide said suddenly. "He died when I was 12, job site accident. I built this company because I wanted to create something that would make him proud. Make buildings that didn't just stand up, but meant something." Carter turned to her, seeing the girl she'd been behind the CEO she'd become. He would be proud, Carter said quietly. This project, it means something. It'll outlive both of us. Adelaide smiled, but it was tinged with sadness. What about you? Why did you really stop? And don't tell me it's just your hands. You've proven you can still create. So what scared you away? Carter was quiet for a long moment, his gaze on the golden compass tattoo. Sarah, my wife. She used to say I loved buildings more than people. I'd deny it, but she was right. I was always at the office. Always traveling to sites, always choosing one more project over dinner with my family. And then the accident happened, and I lost her, and I realized she'd been right all along. His voice cracked slightly. Ruby was 4. She barely remembered having a dad who was present. I was a stranger to my own daughter because I'd prioritized every blueprint over bedtime stories. So when I woke up in that hospital with shaking hands, I saw it as a sign, a chance to be the father I should have been all along. Carter West had to die, so Carter Flynn could be the dad Ruby deserved. Adelaide listened without interrupting, her expression soft with understanding. But Ruby's 7 now, she said gently. And from what I've seen, you're an amazing father. She's confident, creative, happy. You did that. You rebuilt your relationship with her. So maybe it's not about choosing between architecture and family. Maybe it's about learning to balance both. Carter wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. Because maybe Adelaide was right. Maybe he'd been so afraid of becoming that absent father again that he'd overcorrected. Maybe there was space for both versions of himself to exist. Carter Flynn, the father. Carter West, the architect. Not one or the other, but both. The thought terrified and exhilarated him in equal measure. Before he could respond, Adelaide's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and her expression changed, brightened with barely contained excitement. "The design board," she said, her voice tight. "They want to see our proposal, tomorrow. Final presentation. This is it, Carter. This is our shot." Tomorrow came faster than Carter wanted. He stood backstage at the Portland Design Board's auditorium, wearing a borrowed suit that didn't quite fit. Adelaide had insisted he be there, even though the agreement was he'd stay anonymous. "You don't have to speak," she'd promised. "Just be there. In case they have technical questions I can't answer, please." So here he was, hands shaking worse than usual from nerves, watching Adelaide command the stage like she'd been born to it. She presented the Emerald Gateway design with passion and precision. The board members, 20 of them, including Portland's mayor and several prominent architects, leaned forward in their seats. The renderings appeared on massive screens behind Adelaide. The 5 buildings arranged in their emerald formation, the green roofs, the flowing design that echoed natural forms, the use of light and space that invited instead of intimidated. "This isn't just a building complex," Adelaide said, her voice carrying through the auditorium. "It's a love letter to Portland, to the idea that human creation can honor nature instead of dominating it, that we can build space that serve our needs while respecting the world around us. The Emerald Gateway isn't about making a statement. It's about making a home." The presentation ended. Silence fell. Carter's heart hammered against his ribs. Then one of the board members, an elderly architect Carter recognized as Vincent Ross, one of the legends of sustainable design, stood slowly. His eyes scanned the renderings with the practiced gaze of someone who'd seen 10,000 building designs and found most wanting. "This is extraordinary," Vincent said quietly. "But I have a question, Ms. Hart. These designs show an understanding of the golden ratio that's almost intuitive. An architectural philosophy that prioritizes human response over technical showmanship. This level of vision doesn't come from design teams or consultants, so I'll ask directly, who is the architect behind this? Adelaide's gaze flickered to where Carter stood in the wings. He could see her internal debate, honesty versus the agreement they'd made. Carter gave a small nod. The truth was coming out whether he liked it or not. Carter Flynn, Adelaide said firmly. My chief architect. Vincent's eyebrows rose. Carter Flynn. I'm not familiar with that name, and I know every major architect in North America. He paused, studying the designs again. Then his eyes landed on something. May I see the detail on the Cultural Center's main entrance? Adelaide pulled it up on screen. The entrance showed intricate use of angles and light, creating a compass rose effect on the floor when the sun hit at certain times. Vincent's expression changed. Recognition. Shock. He looked directly at where Carter stood in the wings, though Carter wasn't sure how the old architect could see him in the darkness offstage. Carter West, Vincent said. Not a question. A statement. The Golden Architect. You're alive. A murmur ran through the board. Carter felt his stomach drop. But then Vincent smiled. I thought we'd lost you, son. I'm glad to see we were wrong. He turned back to Adelaide. Ms. Hart. Hart Industries has our approval. Conditional on one requirement. Carter Flynn, or West, or whatever name he chooses, must be the lead architect. This vision requires his hand to guide it through completion. Non-negotiable. Adelaide looked at Carter. The entire board looked at Carter. And Carter realized he was standing at a crossroads he'd never expected to face. He could walk away, disappear back into the safety of being a waiter, protect his anonymity, keep the walls he'd built between his past and present intact. Or he could step forward, own both versions of himself, risk the obsession he'd fought so hard to escape. But this time, with the knowledge that Ruby came first, always, that he'd learned balance the hard way, that he wasn't the same man who'd lost himself in blueprints and forgotten his family. Carter took a breath, stepped out of the wings and into the stage lights, faced the board who'd just publicly identified him. My name is Carter Flynn, he said clearly. I used to be Carter West. I left architecture 3 years ago because I'd lost sight of what mattered, my family, my daughter, myself. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the faces watching him. But working on Emerald Gateway taught me something. Creating beautiful things doesn't have to mean destroying your life. Balance is possible if you're intentional about it. So yes, I'll be the lead architect. On my terms, I work primarily remotely. I maintain time with my daughter as priority 1. And my name stays Carter Flynn. I'm not interested in resurrection of the Carter West legend. I'm interested in building something meaningful while being present for the people I love. Vincent started clapping. Slowly at first, then others joined until the entire board was applauding. Welcome back, Vincent said warmly. The world missed you. 3 months later, construction on Emerald Gateway was underway. Carter stood at the site, Ruby's hand in his, watching the first building's framework rise against the Portland sky. It was starting to take shape, starting to look like the vision he'd described to Adelaide that first night. Ruby tugged his sleeve. Daddy, you made that? There was awe in her voice. Carter knelt down to her eye level. I helped design it, baby, but a lot of people are building it together. Ruby hugged him tight. I'm proud of you, Daddy. Mommy would be too. Carter's throat tightened. Ruby had only been 4 when Sarah died, but she kept her mother alive in small moments like this. Thank you, sweetheart, he whispered. Adelaide approached, her heels clicking on the construction site's temporary walkways. She'd become more than a client over these months. A friend. Maybe more, though neither of them had named it yet. Design review is next week. she said, falling into step beside them. Vincent wants to feature Emerald Gateway in architecture today. I told him you'd probably say no to an interview, but the building itself is fair game. Carter smiled. The building can speak for itself. That's the point. Adelaide nodded, unsurprised. Then Ruby surprised them both by grabbing Adelaide's hand, too. Miss Adelaide, will you come to my soccer game Saturday? Daddy says you're very busy, but I'm playing forward and I'm really good. Adelaide's expression softened in a way Carter rarely saw. I'd love to, she said, squeezing Ruby's hand. The three of them stood there watching the construction, an unlikely family formed from spilled wine and second chances. Carter looked at his wrist, at the golden compass tattoo that had once defined him, then nearly destroyed him, and now pointed toward something new. Not the past, not the future, just the present moment. A daughter who loved him. A project that mattered. A woman who'd reminded him that hiding from your gifts was just another way of being lost. 6 months after that, the Emerald Gateway opened to the public. 20,000 people attended the dedication ceremony. Carter stood off to the side, away from cameras and reporters, watching Ruby play in the new community center's children's area. Adelaide had given the opening speech, thanking her team and mentioning Carter only as the visionary who made this possible. True to his word, he'd stayed out of the spotlight, but anyone who understood architecture knew. The fingerprints of Carter West were all over this project. The way light played through the buildings, the organic flow of space, the golden ratio evident in every proportion. Vincent Ross published his article calling it the most significant architectural achievement of the decade. But what mattered most to Carter was Ruby's reaction when she first walked through the cultural center. She'd gasped, spinning in slow circles to take it all in. Daddy, it's like being inside a rainbow. How did you make it feel like magic? That was when Carter knew he'd succeeded. Not as Carter West, the legendary architect, but as Carter Flynn, the father who'd figured out how to be both present and purposeful, who'd learned that the best buildings weren't monuments to ego, but gifts to the community, who'd discovered that the compass tattoo on his wrist had never pointed away from his family. It had been pointing home all along. He just needed someone to remind him how to read it. Adelaide joined him, 2 cups of coffee in hand. She passed him one, and they stood in comfortable silence, watching Ruby make friends with other children in the space they'd created. Thank you, Carter said finally, for not giving up, for tracking down a waiter with a tattoo, for seeing something in me I'd stopped seeing in myself. Adelaide smiled. Thank you for taking the risk, for trusting that you could be both the man you were and the man you'd become. She paused, then added softly, Ruby asked me yesterday if I was going to be her stepmom someday. I didn't know what to say. Carter turned to her, his heart suddenly beating faster. What did you tell her? Adelaide met his eyes, grey depths filled with hope and vulnerability. I told her that some questions need to be answered by grown-ups talking to each other first. So I'm asking, Carter Flynn. Not your past, not your talent, not the architect. Just you. Is there space in your carefully balanced life for something more than friendship between us? Because I've been in love with you for months, and I'm tired of pretending I'm just here for the buildings. Carter's answer came not in words, but in action. He set down his coffee, cupped Adelaide's face in his trembling hands, and kissed her. Soft at first, then deeper, pouring 3 years of grief and 6 months of growing feelings into that single moment. When they pulled apart, Ruby was watching from across the room with a knowing smile that made them both laugh. She gave them an enthusiastic thumbs up before returning to her new friends. Is that a yes? Adelaide asked, slightly breathless. Carter rested his forehead against hers. That's a yes. To more. To us. To building something together that's not made of glass and steel, but just as important. 1 year later, Carter and Adelaide stood on the roof garden of the Emerald Gateway Cultural Center. Below them, Portland spread out in lights and life. Above them, stars punctured the clear night sky. Carter's hands still trembled, probably always would, but they were steady enough to hold the small velvet box he pulled from his pocket, steady enough to kneel, steady enough to ask the question that terrified and exhilarated him. Adelaide Hart, you saw me when I was invisible, believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, reminded me that I didn't have to choose between being a good father and being a whole person. Will you marry me? Will you help me keep building this life we've started? Be Ruby's stepmom and my partner and the person I come home to every night? Adelaide's eyes filled with tears. She pulled Carter to his feet, kissing him before he could even finish the question. Yes, she said against his lips. Yes to all of it. To you. To Ruby. To every building we'll design, and every dinner we'll share, and every normal, extraordinary day ahead of us. She pulled back, laughing through happy tears. Though I have to warn you, Ruby already told me which dress she wants to wear to our wedding and insisted on being the flower girl and having final approval on the cake flavor. Your daughter is a formidable negotiator. Carter laughed, the sound free and full in a way it hadn't been since before the accident. She learned from the best. They stood there on the roof garden, surrounded by the building they'd created together, and Carter thought about the night that changed everything. The spilled wine, the slipped sleeve, the golden compass tattoo catching the light at exactly the right moment to be recognized by exactly the right person. Fate or chance? He'd never know. Didn't matter. What mattered was the woman in his arms, the daughter waiting at home, the life he'd built by learning to balance instead of choose. The architecture he created now had different names: love, family, home, buildings that didn't need foundations because they were built on trust and time, and the hard work of showing up every day. Carter West was gone. Carter Flynn had taken his place, but the compass tattoo remained, no longer a reminder of who he'd been or what he'd lost. Now it pointed toward the future, toward Adelaide's smile, toward Ruby's laughter, toward buildings that would stand long after they were gone, but more importantly, toward the moments that made life worth living in the first place. The golden ratio of existence itself. Balance, purpose, love. And somewhere in Portland, a waiter serving wine had no idea he was one slipped sleeve away from his entire life changing. Just like Carter had been, just like anyone could be. Because sometimes the accidents we fear the most lead us exactly where we need to go.